Hello, welcome to Downey High School's online history class. I'm your instructor, Ms. Lajano, and today we're going to be focusing on the growth of industry in the United States. So we have already talked about how industrialization was a movement that occurred between 1870 and 1920. This was a movement from farms to factories that emphasized the use of machinery and unskilled labor to produce goods quickly. So essentially, we're moving from an agrarian society to a factory-based society. We also talked about how that led to urbanization, which is the rapid growth of cities. But what we're going to be focusing on today is the growth of corporations as a result of this industrial process. And what we mean by that is the growth of large companies that are chains. Okay, so today we almost take for granted that this is how businesses operate, right? We have Walmart and Disney and Amazon, these like massive corporations that everyone in the country knows. But up until the industrial period, that was not the case. Most businesses were small farms or family-owned companies. They were not these massive multi-state corporations. So we want to talk about how did that transition occur and what are the benefits and drawbacks of that kind of a transition. So what we want to talk about first is the growth of what we call trusts and monopolies. This is how we refer to these corporations that are popping up during this period. A monopoly comes from the root word mono, which means one. And a monopoly is essentially when one company tries to take over an industry. Okay, so if you've ever played the game Monopoly, hopefully you've played that at some point in your life, right? The purpose of the game is to put everyone else out of business so you can have all the money for yourself. And that is essentially what a monopoly is. You take over an entire industry, so you are the only company producing that good. That means all the consumers have to go to you, so you're going to make the profit from that good. And in the United States, we tend not to prefer monopolies. We like choice. Welcome to capitalism, right? We like Coke and Pepsi. We want options. Okay, but during this period, what we're going to see is the growth of some massive corporations that function almost like monopolies because they have taken over so much of the market. Now, sometimes these companies are not going to be able to take over the entire market, and they get into a position where they don't want to compete with each other, but they also can't afford to buy each other out. Okay, so this would be sort of like, let's think athletic shoes, right? You have like Adidas and Nike. They're both huge corporations. Neither has enough money to buy the other one out, but they don't want to compete with each other. So what they would do instead is they would create a trust. So a trust is when several companies combine resources to control an industry, and they can do that by working together. They can do that by sharing board members. So I appoint the same person to the board of Adidas and Nike. And then when they're having their conversations, Adidas can decide, we're going to make a soccer shoe this year. Then the board member goes to Nike and goes, hey, don't make a soccer shoe because Adidas is doing that. Let's make basketball shoes. And you're choosing not to compete with each other. Then you share the profits that you both make because you're run by similar boards. So that is called a trust when you're essentially reducing competition by working together. Okay, the goal of both of these, though, whether you're taking over an entire industry or you're working together to control an industry, the purpose is to reduce competition in order to earn more money, right? All the consumers have to come to me for this good, and therefore I'm going to make more money off of them. Okay, so let's talk about how these trusts grow during this period. There are two major methods that we're going to look at. So the first one is called horizontal integration. These methods were established by the business tycoons we're studying during this era, but they are still utilized by businesses today if they want to consolidate and make more profit. So horizontal integration is the first one. If you took math, you know the horizontal axis, right? That's the x-axis, and it means the flat one, right? It's the one that's running at the horizon. So this is, you are buying out someone who is even with you. You're buying out your competition. Okay, so this would be sort of like if Adidas bought out Nike. If In-N-Out bought out like Five Guys, or even McDonald's, if you want to think about it that way. Okay, so horizontal integration, you buy out your competition. Now everybody who is buying that shoe or that hamburger has to come purchase from you. Okay, so that's horizontal integration. That's one way to make a trust. The other option is called vertical integration. And vertical integration is when you buy out your supply chain. Okay, so this is not your actual competition. This is, what do I need to make my good? Okay, so say I'm In-N-Out, right? In-N-Out makes hamburgers. You may know what hamburgers are made out of. Sorry, cows. Okay, so if I'm In-N-Out, I go and I buy a cow farm, right? And that is how I buy out my supply chain. So I'm controlling the entire production. And there are a couple of reasons I would want to do that. Number one, now I don't have to pay any money to the cow farm owners, right? They're not taking profit from me. And number two, I can control the quality of my production. So if I want to have only grass-fed beef, great. If I want to pump them full of hormones, great, right? This is part of my being able to control all of my production. And one of the guys that we're going to talk about today, Andrew Carnegie, was really good at this form of integration. Okay, now the men who did this during the Gilded Age era, we refer to as either captains of industry or robber barons, depending on your perspective. I want to introduce a couple of them and then talk about why we have these variety of perspectives. So this guy right here is a really famous guy from the period named John Rockefeller, who took over the oil industry. And Rockefeller was so good at horizontal integration. Remember, that's when you buy out your competition, that people nicknamed him Wreckefeller. They were like, you go up against this guy, he will wreck you and he will take the oil industry out from under you. So that's Rockefeller. Second really famous guy from this, look at the picture right there, Santa. No, that is Andrew Carnegie. So Andrew Carnegie took over the steel industry, and he actually worked himself up from being, he was an immigrant himself from Scotland. He earned $1.20 a week as a bobbin boy in a factory, worked himself up to owning more than 90% of the steel industry. And by the end of his life, had given away $350 million in philanthropy. Okay, so these guys are sort of the, when you talk about the American dream, a lot of people think of them as the, pull themselves up by their own bootstraps, like started from the bottom, now we're here kind of guys. Okay, so that's Andrew Carnegie. Third guy is this guy on the right, Cornelius Vanderbilt, who dominated the railroad industry. And there are others besides these. JP Morgan Chase is another famous one, like Chase Bank, started during this period. Okay, now let's talk about the two different perspectives. So some people have a very positive view of these guys, and they will refer to them as, quote unquote, the captains of industry or the men who built America. What they'll say is these guys are the original rags to riches stories, right? And they look at Andrew Carnegie and they say, like, this is the American dream, and look what they built for America, and they created all of these methods that businesses use today, right? And so they're going to admire them. On the other hand, some people are going to call them robber barons, which you can tell has a negative connotation. And what they're going to say is, no, these guys built their companies on the backs of immigrants, women, and children. So they're going to say, whoop-de-doo, Andrew Carnegie, that you gave away $350 million. Where did you get that from? You got it from paying women and immigrants a very low wage, right? And so they're going to say, no. These guys took advantage of people. That's how they built their wealth. Okay, so these are the two basic perspectives. If we were in class, I would love to hear more about where you're landing. Maybe we'll get to talk about that later on this week. Okay, last thing we want to talk about is the benefits and drawbacks of this transition for the United States. So start with the benefits. One of the benefits is mass production and efficiency means you get cheap goods, right? This is like when you go to Walmart or you go to Costco, right? And you can buy goods for very little money. Okay, that is the result of efficiency and mass production. The other thing that happens is with the birth of the Transcontinental Railroad, right? The choo-choos, they're coming. That creates mass transportation, which connects the country. It also allows you to sell anywhere in the country. This is something we completely take for granted today, right? You can just hop on Amazon and order something from New Jersey and it will be in your house in 2 days. That's not something that the country initially had. So during this period, it makes it so that business can expand. They can sell to other states. And we refer to this as the national market. You can now sell goods anywhere to any person, as opposed to only being able to sell to people who live in Ohio or whatever. So that's going to expand business significantly. The other thing is that affordable and accessible goods means the standard of living for most people is going to go up. Even though we talk about how low wages are during this period, they are increasing. And people are able to purchase more because the goods are cheaper. Okay, so these are some of the benefits. However, let's talk about drawbacks. Obviously, poor working conditions is a problem, right? So long hours, no workers' compensation if you get hurt, there's unsafe conditions. Less ownership means the jobs are actually kind of boring, right? You're doing the same thing over and over. This is different from owning your own business or your own farm, where there's a lot of creative energy and choice in what you're doing. Okay, so that is definitely a drawback. Another drawback is there is an increasing gap between the rich and the poor. So you're going to see a few guys accumulate a lot of wealth during this period. And then there are a lot of people who have very little. So that is an issue that we're concerned about. And one of the results of that is that a few men wield a lot of power, which leads to political corruption, right? So if you're in government, you need these really wealthy business leaders on your side. And what that's going to result in is the situation where business and government are sort of in bed together, right? They have this symbiotic relationship, and there's a lot of corruption that comes out of that. There are other drawbacks we can talk about too, pollution and stuff like that. But these are some of the basic benefits and drawbacks of the transition. Thank you for being with us as we're exploring this movement into industry and corporations. Hope you guys have a great day.